Welcome to Wide Angle. I am Uday Bhaskar. Today we look at 15 years after the Kargil War of 1999 and the status of India's composite defense capability. This war was distinctive in many ways. Chief among them were the nuclear weapon status of the subcontinent and the Lahore Peace Accord of February 1999, when India and Pakistan seemed to be taking a path towards peace. However, Kargil happened. India was initially surprised, but gradually turned the tide in its favor and finally evicted the intruders. Yes, lives were lost and many injured. July 26th marks Vijay Divas and is an occasion to pay tribute to the martyrs of this war and to reach out to the families of those who have lost their loved ones and to reassure them that the sacrifices made have not been forgotten and that the nation remains indebted to them. The focus today is on the lessons learnt from the Kargil war and to take stock of 15 years later. Various institutional inadequacies had come to light in the summer of 1999, and the critical question is, where is India 15 years later in terms of its composite defense capability? We have a very eminent panel today comprising Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, formerly the Chief of the Integrated Defence Staff, Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain, GOC of 15 Corps in J&K, and Shri Yogendra Narain, a former Defence Secretary who was there in South Block, sir, as I remember very clearly, at a very critical time. So perhaps I'll turn to you and ask you to reflect that after Kargil, as the Defence Secretary, what would you identify as the critical lessons that have been learnt by the Ministry of Defence and the highest levels of India's defence management?
I would say that there was a lack of coordination amongst the various agencies who guard the security of the nation, and this came to the forefront in the Kargil Review Committee report submitted by Mr. K. Subramaniam, and then in the Group of Ministers report. These group of ministers were constituted after the Kargil Review Committee report was received, and 4 groups were set up. One was on border management, the other one on internal security, the third on intelligence apparatus, and 4th one was on higher defense management. There was a deficiency in all of them, but the basic thing was of lack of coordination. In the higher defense management, we found that the procurement processes were very slow. What the defense forces had asked for about a decade back was still on the anvil, not yet finalized. Then in the intelligence setup, we found that the intelligence agencies were not cooperating within each other. They were
tough battles.
There were silos, independent silos. And thirdly, we found that there was not adequate delegation of powers to the defense headquarters in all the 3 headquarters, Army, Air Force, Navy. So both financial powers and administrative powers. So all these defects were identified and attempts were made based on the recommendations of the group of ministers to remove all those deficiencies, and we started acting immediately after the report of the group of ministers was received and approved by the Cabinet Committee on Security.
So these were the problem areas that you had identified. I'll come back to you in a moment to say that 14, 15 years later, has it made a difference? But before that, General Hasnain, if I could ask you, when we look at Kargil, the standard thing was the country was surprised. We were stunned. Yet, we were able to turn it around. So, could you sort of help us to understand what made the difference? How did we win that war?
Absolutely. And the fact that we did win the war from a very adversarial situation which we took over right in the early part of May 1999. I would say the first of the issues on the priority-wise almost, I would say, was our ability to respond. You see, everyone would have thought you would probably go into a shell, the leadership would go into a shell, and the response would not be adequate. But we found that immediately we responded to the situation. We pushed out 8th Mountain Division from the valley, sent it up to Kargil, and in a matter of a couple of days, they got the act together. Secondly, I would not take away anywhere the importance of junior leadership of the Indian Army. The junior leadership, I in fact would dedicate it to the young soldier and to the young officer who led him. You see, fighting in the mountains is not an easy thing, especially when you are in an adversarial situation such as this, where mountaintops have been occupied by intruders and you really don't know who they are. You don't know what their capability and capacity is. And you start using attritional methods to get after them. It takes the juice out of you, I would say, virtually, in terms of junior leadership. And that's something which was displayed in ample here. The third thing is a tendency to criticize many times the Indian Army's regimental system. I think it's the regimental system which rarely came to the fore, because these were infantry battles. Most of them were infantry battles with a lot of support from the artillery. And the artillery rarely came to the fore here with the Bofors gun. And I think it was the cap badge, the regimental flag, and the spirit of the nation behind it which led to the success. And the last of them, I would say, the ability to convert a tactical and operational success through response into a political, military, diplomatic success. I can say that if we had not ensured that the United States stepped in at that time and forced Pakistan to retract, perhaps we may have taken the better part of another 3 months to get the people out.
You know, I think on this there are two other aspects which perhaps need to be flagged. One is that the Air Force, after a certain, shall we say, reflection and internal review, they were also able to add their contribution. And in the same breath, may I add as a sailor that the Indian Navy also played a role. Absolutely. But we'll come to that later. But Admiral Sinha, if I could turn to you. Mr. Narain has identified the 4 areas which were seen as institutional inadequacies. Almost a decade later, you were there as the Chief of the Integrated Defence Staff. What is your assessment about the improvements, or where did we make the difference within the system, you know, in the lattice of higher defence management? Which are the specific areas where there is a tangible gain?
Let me begin on a positive note, and where the former Defence Secretary left. As far as the acquisition process is concerned, to a very large extent it has been streamlined, but some more progress is required. Time consumed has been reduced, and there is a fair amount of capability building. Now the headquarters Integrated Defence Staff does all the vetting, and they have the technical know-how of all the proposals from the service headquarters. And thereafter it runs through 2 committees which are collegiate in nature. All the arms, all the departments of the MOD sit in that meeting, and these days the IDS headquarters is also working as an interface between the industry and the MOD. So their representatives also come and tell us as to what they can make, because the decision whether it will be made in India or some of it will be bought from outside and thereafter it will be built in India, or will it be outrightly purchased, is a big decision to make. And the acceptance of necessity is finally given by the Defence Acquisition Council. So the representation, in fact these 2 committees are headed by the service officers of the rank of Vice Admiral, and the higher committee is chaired by the Chief of Integrated Defence Staff, where all the Vice Chiefs and all the additional secretaries of various departments are the members. So I would say that the Defence Acquisition Council, the steering of Defence Acquisition Council, is one achievement as far as the acquisitions are concerned. The second issue that I will like to flag, which is lesser known, that is the crisis management, disaster management. There is a group which is headed by the Chief of Integrated Defence Staff, which meets immediately if a disaster or when a calamity has taken place. And this committee consists of people, representatives from MOD, the Ministry of Home Affairs, MEA, and the resident commissioners of the affected state. So, I would say that there
these
is
two areas. But I'll come back to this later about the degree of the integration. Mr. Narain, if I could turn to you, sir, which is the really sort of, an old chestnut that has come up each time. Why I'm raising this is the late Mr. Subramaniam, as you know, was the author of the Kargil Review, and we had studied that in some detail. And one of the areas that he often drew attention to was the nature of civil military relations in general, and the fact that India is perhaps the only country where the military as an institution does not have a locus in higher defense management. Now, you were there as Defense Secretary. I remember discussing this with you a few times, even after you had demitted office. But what would you sort of ascribe this to? Because in 2014, we are still in the same place, that the military is not yet in the loop as far as higher defense is concerned. So, I mean, what is your reflection on this?
You see, it's how you see the situation. Earlier, the impression was and the feeling was that the defense forces were not involved in any decision of the defense ministry. Now, this was supplanted and rectified by making the Defense Procurement Board, the Defense Acquisition Council, the Defense Production Board, the Defense Research Board consist of officers from the defense forces, as well as the political head, as well as the defense ministry people. So, for instance, the Defense Procurement Board had all the vice chiefs together with the defense secretary. The Defense Acquisition Council had the defense minister with all the three chiefs, and the defense secretary and the defense finance secretary. The Defense Production Board had all the three chiefs and plus the Secretary Defense Production, and so was research. So, in all there was an integration. There was this feeling that the headquarters of the armed forces did not enjoy the status of the ministry. So, what was recommended, what was accepted and what was implemented, that
the integration.
Make them part. So, that is why the name became Integrated Headquarters of the Ministry of Defence. All the three headquarters have become integrated, and lot of powers were delegated to the extent that orders which were normally passed by the Defence Ministry in
have now been given to service headquarters.
Were given to the service headquarters. So, the integration was brought about in this manner.
So, what I'll tell you, I'll come back to this perhaps after the break, but one view is that as recently as last year, a former service chief who is also a member of the National Security Advisory Board had described the three chiefs as the three invisible men in terms of the higher defense management. But I'll hold that thought myself. I'll come to both General Hasnain and Admiral Sinha to perhaps give their views. But we'll take a short break. Keep watching. We'll be back very soon to take this discussion forward.